and transform this landscape and the cultural and the way of living of the peoples of this region and the entire Colombia. So in this case, I would like to start with another landscape, which is the beautiful mountain of Monserrate in Bogota, Monserrate, where I had the pleasure to meet, at that time, our fellow student Esteban García at Universidad de los Andes. There is something, if you have seen this mountain, it's really, the view is breathtaking, it's really moving. At the same time, it's a testimony that regeneration is possible. If you see Monserrate today, you will see a very green mountain, but if you go back in time to 10 years, 20, 30, 50 years back, these mountains used to be yellow and dry because of the quality of the soil. So if you see pictures from the 50s, for instance, it looks like a place where sand is taking, like a mine. So now, you know, this greenish thing is a generation that is actually very recent. And I picked this place again because in Bogota today, if you move a little bit forward and go to Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano, you will find in the entrance of the university a fantastic artwork by Venezuelan kinetic artist Cruz Diez. And today, you will see that Esteban García, who's been working, tracing histories of computer arts in the States, in the Middle East, also in Spain, and other parts, for instance, in Africa, in terms of dances, it's been also able to find connections with Cruz Diez and the regeneration of electricity, going back to the idea that Professor Richard posed that art is energy. So having a Colombian keynote is always a pleasure, and I just want to say that Esteban is an accomplished researcher and professor. He's been teaching at Purdue University for a while and recently moved to the University of San Jose, State University of San Jose in California, and is a very active artist as well in terms of interaction, public art interventions, and luminic and mapping, right? So please help me welcome our own Esteban García.
Hello, Andres, thank you so much for the introduction, for the invitation, to Felipe Cesar, Adriana, for our host, Oliver Grau. I'm so excited to be here today. Let me see, is the mic very hot? Yes? Okay. So I, want to approach this presentation talking about my personal experience, tracing the tangible in computer art and how these histories inform my art practice as a collaborative dialogue with the artifacts that are found. So as Andres said, I am originally from Bogota, Barrio Cedritos. I got my first computer when I was 10 years old. And for me, it was just very natural to start using the computer to paint each of the pixels because there wasn't any other thing that you could do with that computer. Locally, I found like a great program at Universidad de los Andes called Medios Electrónicos y Artes del Tiempo. And after that, I went to Purdue University in 2005, which was very critical for the story that I'm going to tell today. I got my PhD in technology. I worked at Purdue for 11 years as a professor of computer graphics. And currently, I am a professor of digital media art and spatial art at the Cadre Laboratory for New Media in the Bay Area. So in 2005, sometimes people tell you like, why are you going to a place like Indiana? There's nothing really going on. And I was just so surprised with the amount of information and opportunities that I found there. And this story tries to connect like different aspects of luck, chance, and how all these like are intertwined together to, tell my story. On my first week of being in Purdue University, I arrived to my brother's house, and my sister-in-law was at that moment studying Spanish literature, and she was a good friend of this individual, Massimiliano Giorgini, because he was so interested in Don Quixote that he decided to learn Spanish so she could understand Don Quixote himself in the original language. He is a punk record producer. He has produced more than 100 records at the legendary Sonic Iguana Studios in Lafayette. He now is in Rome. But in this conversation, he said, like, what are you doing here? I told him, yeah, I'm coming to this new program called Electronic and Time-Based Media. And he tells me, you know what? My father is one of the pioneers of computer art. And I don't know, like I didn't really register with me at the moment. Like we talked about so many things. So it kind of, that connection kind of like was dormant for a few years. In 2008, with Professor Fabian Winkler, Shannon McMullen, and one of my peers, Juan Obando, we organized this festival called Audu, Alternative Practices in Sound, and I was able to invite Andres Burbano to our campus and talk about his investigations while he was a student at UC Santa Barbara. In this presentation, in Andres' presentation, he made me aware of the work of Jose Vicente Azuar. You presented, this like great research that you have been doing about Comte d'Azuar and the record that he released. And I also became aware of, media archaeology that became like a really important reference for me as I was researching this. And also to mention that these Jose Vicente Azuar and also the work of Konrad Zuse, all these like early papers that led eventually investigations that led to Andres Burbano's book published a few years ago. So when I started my PhD, I stumbled upon this book at a garage sale, and I got this for $2 back in 2009. This book now is listed in Amazon for about $100, which speaks volumes of how it has shifted from not being like computer art being kind of like a forgotten era of history to now being heavily researched and studied. But one of the things that I found is like, oh, this is Giorgini, the same last name as my friend. I need to contact him. So I was doing back then my PhD, and I wanted to start the first part of my presentation talking about this artist, Aldo Giorgini. So for this term paper, I asked Mas if he had any more information about his father, and we just like made for a coffee, and he brought me this report. It's about like a 70-page report that includes, computer code. It has some art manifesto, where his motivations for making art with the computer. It was like so intriguing to me to find somebody that was writing about computer art in 1975, and furthermore, creating his own publications and using the university as his resource to promote his artwork. And these are like some of the images of the catalog called fields. So he wrote his own software to produce the images, and he explains the mathematical foundations of each of the pieces that you're going to see here, and how he was able to create these fields of trying to visualize the Z dimension in these computer images. And I must clarify that computers back then is like nothing like what we understand today. They were mainframe computers. There was only one at the university. And this particular one, I mean, the screens weren't available. So the only output that he had was plotters. So the plates were reproduced on the catalog. And this is just like a quote that I got from his book. This is actually a collage, the previews that I found later, to produce the photograph of the work made using the work fields. So I turned in my paper, my professor told me, hey, there's this thing called SIGGRAPH, you should send this paper to that. This is in 2011. They have a history focus, and I think they will be very interested on your research. And I had the luck to meet Charles Suri and Roman Berosco. This is the time where he received the Lifetime Achievement in Digital Art. I really wanted him to tell me a little bit about more what was going on in the computer art. Charles Suri is deemed to be one of the fathers of computer graphics and computer art, so I needed to find some sort of validation, and he told me, look, I am tired, I'm retired, I can't help you with your research, but I'll tell you this. And he sent me this message. Aldo Giorgini is an important artist in the early history of computer art. In fact, a better artist than many who have received more media attention. This was so important to me, and both Suri and Berosco made me aware of this book that was published that year by Margit Rosen that has become like a really source of inspiration for me to continue these historic oriented studies. Furthermore, I started finding lots of like things that Aldo Giorgini participated in, many seminal shows of computer art. And recently I've been looking a lot at this book by Raymond Kurzweil. He is an inventor, and this is like an excellent book to look again, published in the 80s, but talks a lot about, it's called Age of Intelligent Machines, which I think is something that we've been talking a lot in this conference about this. And one of the things that I, found was, well, I knew that not a lot of people knew about Giorgini, and I wonder, is there a missing chapter in computer art? But most importantly, in further conversations with Massimiliano, he told me, oh, if you want more, I have more. Like my garage is completely untouched. My dad died in 1994, and you can come in and check out the stuff. And I started excavating things for a 3-year period. I spent so much time in Aldo's studios, just like as, I like this word that Erkki Huhtamo used about rummaging, because I really was just like scavenging like so many things, and some of the damaged pieces, for example, this one, there was a flood in the early 2000s, and many of the works, I mean, this was like a room of horrors to see that this is how Giorgini stored his work, and many of these pieces had never been seen by anybody. He had some pieces that were really famous in some circuits, but all the things that I'm going to show today have never been shown here in Colombia. So spending so much time in Aldo's studio was, me as an art practitioner, I was, continuing to make art. So at any given day that I would spend like my whole morning in Aldo's studios, then I would go to my studio in Lafayette. And this relationship that he had with Materiality was extremely influential for my art practice. So I kind of like put in here a parallel of what would be a day, what would be one day for me in 2012, and how, thinking about the materiality and constructing using my hands to produce my art. So continually, I'm gonna make a quick bio sketch of Aldo Giorgini. He was born in Voghera, Italy in 1934. When he was 3 years old, his family moved to Eritrea because the Italian government was expanding to Africa, and he gave some incentives to Italians to move there. And then during the Second World War, he was a refugee there. And when he was only 10 years old to age 15, he spent so much time hanging out with Carlo Ingegneri, who is an artist that was also a refugee, who painted. So Aldo was the kid that was helping him mix the colors, and this kind of like laid out a very strong painting foundation. And later on, we'll talk about like his relationship to color. He returns to Voghera, and then he becomes the art apprentice of Ambrogio Casati, who was one of the Italian futurists, and he helped him restore some of the frescoes that had been damaged during the war. However, he goes for a scientific path. He talks in some of his manuscripts how he always felt that art and science, that there was not a disconnect between them. So at heart, he will always make art. He wanted to go for more like a scientific route. So he gets this scholarship to study mechanical engineering on the University of Pavia. Further on, he became an associate professor of hydraulics at Polytechnic University of Torino. And while he was a professor, he met Elena. They married in 1964. And in 1966, he was a Fulbright scholar and brought Aldo to the United States to study his PhD in civil engineering at Colorado State. And after that, he became a postdoc at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where he has the first encounter with the computer, and he started making his first visualizations, computational visualizations. So this brings him to Purdue University in 1967, where he became a professor at the Purdue Department of Civil Engineering, which is the background of our story. In 1968, Massimiliano is born, and in 1970, the other son, Flaviano, is born. And I want to emphasize in this theme of the family because it will be very critical to the development of Aldo as an artist. I just got this photo a few years ago from Roberta Moro, archivist at the. She is the niece of Maria Teresa Moroni, a best friend of Professor Aldo Giorgini when he lived in Italy. Roberta works as an archivist at the Politecnico di Milano University, and this is just to show that there were like some themes of the geometric abstraction that would come up later. And then another theme of his early paintings has a lot to do with the use of representing fluid dynamics, and here just from like a more artistic way. But it wasn't until 1973 that he was asked to design a flyer for a talk by Eugene Cernan. He is the last man to be in the moon. So he returned to Purdue, which is a cradle of astronauts. And then in this poster, he juxtaposed one of the images that he had produced for his research in the flyer, and this was this aha moment that the computer could be used for artistic expression. And I started experimenting, like switching the plotter different ways and then painting over it. And then he produces, this is like, to my knowledge, the first earliest decidedly piece of art that he made. And during his lifetime, he produced different software frameworks for making art. And I was able to find fields, which I already talked about. Another one was surfaces, stretch, and lastly, photo and palette. This was the machine that he used, Calcom, which was a very common plotter in the United States. It is kind of the counterpart in Europe was the Graphomat C64 designed by Konrad Zuse. But there was like a kind of like a parallel scenes that were happening both in Europe and in the United States. He was so committed to computer art that he wanted to become an advocate for it. So he forms this committee at the university called Aesthetics in Technology, and through Aesthetics of Technology, he starts this Artist in Residence program where he became acquainted with very important computer artists of the time, including Robert Mallory, which locally there's a recent paper by Catherine Mason talking about his contribution. He's a really interesting figure in computer arts. This particular catalog that you see here has an interview with Harold Cohen, which he had a friendship, and also talks about the Computer Art Day. Just a little parenthesis on Robert Mallory, because he is a pioneer on digital manufacture. He was also using the computer plots in different ways to produce 3D sculptures in a similar way that we use additive or subtractive manufacturing with this logic of slices. The only difference is that they would use a bandsaw and cut by hand, but the principle of how these sculptures were together, I argue that this is like a precursor to digital manufacture. These are some images from the Computer Art Day. There's lots of data that still needs to be analyzed. We have tapes of this event. As you can see here, it brought to Purdue one of the most relevant computer artists of the time, including Charles Suri, Kurt Lochner, Jeff and Colette Bangert, Robert Mallory, Richard Helmick, Ken Knowlton, Lillian Schwartz, and Harold Cohen. This is a picture extracted from the paper. And this is the work of Jeff and Colin Bangert. I had the luck to talk with Colin Bangert, which explained to me how this Midwestern scene operated. And they were all sort of misfits, like they were misfits in the art departments. They didn't understand why they were using the computers. The people in the STEM field did not understand why the scientists were making art. So this was like the place where they could all be weird together and show each other's like discoveries. I'm going to talk about Giorgini's process, which was extremely involved. He would first, after creating all the code, he would create these very large plots, and then he would go on and paint them by hand, one by over a very long time. Here we can see the finished painting, and strangely enough, although he liked the craft of painting, he would go over and make an electrostatic print over Mylar because he really liked the shiny blacks and the kind of like that perfection. So it was kind of like an interesting back and forward. But like one of the cool things about this project is that I was able to find the original paintings along with many Mylar prints, as you can see here. And the topic of his work was always in relation to fluid dynamics, and there were like lots of theories in relationship to this concept of the cylinder and how the cylinder can affect the flow and the different images that you can produce with that by adding variables such as, for example, time. So for each of these images that you see, there's like 5 to 10 different iterations where the time changes. So he was never able to put these animations together in his lifetime, but I think that he really had this idea of making computer films. These are other examples of the work that he was doing. These are screen printing, again, more of the topic of materiality. And I think it was just the natural thing to do back then because, this was the only visual output that they had available. I started getting more interested on how he would do these pop-up exhibits and taking over the space. So his computer art starts becoming more spatial. And he would just paste his plots in on the hallways of the civil engineering department. And then in 1976 and 1977, he starts this project called the Software Light that, it is produced mathematically, trying to create a simulation of light sources interacting with each other. When I look at this work, it looks so contemporary, don't you think? Like, I see touch designer stuff, and then I'm like, oh, like, yeah, like, except like now it's interactive, but like, this is just like, oh, this is like extremely beautiful. Okay, I'm still on. So each of these, painted by hand, were put together and turned into a single photo montage that was 87 by 36 inches each, 2 meters by almost 1 meter, multiplied by 6. So we get finally this computer art mural installed, that was installed at the Potter Engineering Center. And it's like extremely amazing to me that 3.6 meters by 2.2. So this spatial approach to me was very innovative. So all these successes of Giorgini with computer art play a really strong contrast with some, like all these breakthroughs with the death of Elena in this moment, which turns to be like a huge blow to Giorgini's life emotionally. Now he has the task to be alone and take care of his 2 children. So his computational art practice kind of decreases from this moment, but nonetheless, he continues to create some of the first 3-dimensional frameworks to produce images. A lot of the times, like, he would be making sketches. In 1979, he gets a new device, like his first computer displays, and he creates this program called Palette. And Palette was just a color mixture system. We have to understand that there were no standards available. Like, we couldn't talk about like RGB 255. Like, he contributed to the standardization of color in a SIGGRAPH committee from 1979. But for this story in particular, what he did with the Tektronix was that it only had like available 64 colors. So what he decides to do is to create a program that creates a mathematical distribution that through the dots and the patterns can create the different shades. So I argue that Aldo is, in fact, one of the precursors of shaders, which I think is pretty cool. This is a manuscript that has the original code of the photo software that he used to create these landscapes, and his intent was to create these photorealistic images for the standards of the early 1980s. We have to understand that this is just the computer terminal, and then he would take pictures from that because there wasn't like any outputs. In 1982, he won the first prize in a computer graphics contest organized by the German Computer Graphics and Computer Art Society. However, like, he kind of was working, so much also as a researcher, so a lot of the work overlaps, and towards the 1980s, his work starts moving more in favor of the computational hydromechanics for 2 reasons. Reason 1, he starts to gain recognition internationally for the computational hydromechanics more, but number 2, because his colleagues did not understand and did not support his art practice, which I think that, times have changed, but at the same time, we still have some institutions that will find that maybe art is a waste of time, and that's sad. But here's like some of the activities that he was doing. Another theme for the decrease of computer art production is his devotion to be a father. So right, around the mid to late 1980s, Mas and Flaviano started getting really into punk music. So he was an avid supporter of their kids, and he would, for example, lend them money to rent a venue so they could create Spot Zero, which is a legendary venue in Indiana for punk rock. They started using Aldo Studio to practice and record music, and he would even create computer fonts to label the records for, such as this. He would design the flyers for the shows himself, and in 1998, the band Screeching Weasel featured Aldo Giorgini as a tribute with his piece Bridge Tunnel in 1998. In 1994, Aldo dies due to brain cancer, leaving a lot of untold histories that unfortunately we will never be able to know, but I like to think of him as my teacher from the underworld because he's been a huge influence for me. And kind of like going back to what Ricardo was saying about preservation and dissemination, this has been like a very important task for me. So during my research, I created a database with listing all the computer artworks that we found, that I found, over 1,000, in addition to all the manuscripts, the letters. I had to narrow down my samples to only computer art related. But if you're ever like in Indiana, like I invite you to check out the Purdue archives. This research worked as a liaison between the Giorgini family and the Purdue archives. So through my research, the Purdue archives was able to collect this work that I extracted. I've also curated shows with recreations of the installations, but also with the original work. This is at the Purdue Galleries. All this work you can actually see yourselves if you do go to the archive. So I encourage you to do so and find more, because this is my interpretation of this history. And then this is another picture of a display at the archives. And later on, I published my book in 2015 that has the full story of Aldo Giorgini. In 2016, with my colleague Tim McGraw at Purdue University, we did this WebGL recreation of Giorgini's frameworks, so you can actually go in and play with them. And continuing on the theme of dissemination, the presentation of this work in important international venues such as Media Art Histories in Riga in 2013. So as I was mentioning, he's like another picture of my studio. Around 2014, I started to get very interested in impossible figures. And as impossible figures go, I was aware of the work of Jose Maria Iturralde. This is like a great painting that is in Medellin, in La Casa del Encuentro, in the Museo de Antioquia. If you ever, I think like there's a lot to be studied about Bienal Coltejer, because it was such an interesting exhibit. So one of the things that I wanted to understand is how, like, I found Iturralde's work referenced so many times as computer art, and I couldn't really understand how these prints were computer art. So I finally was able to get an interview with Jose Maria. He is an artist, still very active. His current paintings are really incredible. And he was born in Cuenca in Spain in 1942. He's one of the artists that incorporated Spain's first computer starting in 1968 to assist his creative process. So a computer like this was the one that the Centro de Cálculo de la Universidad de Madrid received in 1966. The computer was so big that, according to Enrique Castaño Sales, I'll show the reference here in a minute because it's very important. He said that they had to build a new building to store the computer, so they have to wait one more year. And then also, this particular computer was decommissioned by the CERN. So for their standards, it was already old, but it was totally comparable to the computers that were in the American institutions. So the directors, Florentino Briones and Ernesto García Camarero, formed interdisciplinary groups to accelerate research. And they created these seminars. And the seminar that Iturralde was called Seminario Generación Automática de Formas Plásticas. And in this collaboration, they sought to create all the computationally all the different impossible figures inspired by Penrose. So in my conversation with Jose Maria, he said that basically nobody knew what to do with the computer, so the seminars were created as interdisciplinary groups to accelerate research. And there were musicians, architects, painters, and scientists. Back then, computer science was not a thing. They just called them analysts. Here I have like a quote from Jose Maria. We talked about the importance that working with computers could have. We also talked about how artists and scientists should work closely together. And this is an idea that has never left me. So this is the reference to Enrique Castaño Sales. It's like about 1,000 pages dissertation that is fully available online, telling the story of the computer art in Spain. So here are like some of the images that led him to create his visual vocabulary, and further on to create the famous estructuras volantes, which over here we have Jose Ramon, that one of the collaborators here to Jose Maria making these estructuras volantes, so amazing. And then lastly, with Jorge García, a mathematician, and he was studying with me at Purdue back then. No, he was a PhD student back then. Now he's at Google. We created this processing version of Jose Maria's software for people to just play with, and every time you click, it will generate more figures. So this was like our reinterpretation that became so important. So working towards materiality and computing, like as I said, like this influenced my work. So I wanted to show like some of a couple of pieces here. This is a installation in Bloomington, Indiana. It was the result of a work with the community, and how I started getting very interested in the topic of public art technology. And it's a multi-level installation. There's like 7 different panels. And a couple of years ago here, this immersive installation and exhibit Columbus called Prisma. So through this work, I started thinking a lot more about public space and technology and community. So because of this interest, I arrived also to a connected movement, which is GRAPH, the group that was started in Paris, that it is also a precursor to computer art. It is a branch of perceptualists, and a lot of them were Latin American. And I wanted to highlight also another work in Medellin by Julio Leparc that makes us think about these concepts of manufacture that are so common today, but this is a piece from the 1980s. And most importantly for my research is the work of Carlos Cruz Diez, that although he was not officially a member of GRAPH, he participated on many of the GRAPH exhibits. And here are some images from last year's show at the Mambo in Bogota, displaying cromosaturaciones and physichromias. And here we can see the use of technology on Carlos Cruz Diez's immersive art. I think that even his paintings are immersive because they need the viewer in order for us to be able to approach them. This research has been just published a month ago in the Public Art magazine in China, where I explain like a little bit further the development of Carlos Cruz Diez as an artist and how he arrived, for example, for these things that not necessarily considered, early technological art, but there were in some ways some sort of digital objects. He was very interested on the moire patterns. So the first chromo interferences were these objects before he decided to make them fully immersive. So I found this catalog from Museo Arte Moderno in Bogota from 1974, and to me has been so critical to understand the context and what Carlos Cruz Diez was thinking back then. For example, the ambiente cromointerferente in Caracas that is photographed here in the catalog, showing how he was using early slide projectors or film projectors to create the cromointerferencias. I'm currently working with Luis Romero in Caracas, scavenging the current state of Carlos Cruz Diaz's work and other public artworks in Venezuela. This one is Fisicromía Concavo-Convexa in Plaza Venezuela. And Additive Color, this is the second public art piece by Carlos Cruz Diaz in Maiquetía Airport. And there's a paper by Juana Suárez Ferri that talks about that this work has become a symbol of the Venezuelan diaspora because people have taken some of the tiles as a memento and they would just leave Venezuela and have this as a remembrance, which is terrible, but also speaks a lot about the relationship between like society and art. One of the things that has become more interesting for me is this project at the hydroelectric Jose Antonio Paez, which he talks about in the Mambo catalog. And in this, he writes the following. For the chromosaturation in the machine room installed in a cave dug into the mountain 300 meters deep, my idea was to restore the personnel who worked there the continuously transforming situation of the outside light. For this effect, I designed 4 false windows, 5.5 meters wide by 7 meters high, behind 2 RGB lights connected to a programmer. Diffused, colored environment in a continuous evolution. 12 15-minute programs follow one another during the day, and those who work there can modify the duration at will. So this excerpt makes me think about the relationship, like what is a computer? Is it the program? Is it the technology? And in this particular case, I feel that this is extremely innovative. The inclusion of electronic systems in public art is amazing. And this is another piece in Guri, Venezuela, Leoni hydroelectric plant. Now it's called Simón Bolívar, but there's a lot of things called Simón Bolívar. And currently, the piece at the Barrio Carlos R. Restrepo in Medellín, recently restored. I'm really happy to see that they did this. And I also want to mention, as Andrés said, the Anillo de Inducción Cromática en la Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano. We're so lucky, Felipe and Adriana, for having this in Bogotá. It's a huge accomplishment. Because this was created after Carlos Cruz Diaz died in 2019. So, it was like built afterwards, but we're very lucky to have this in Bogotá. And I want to end my presentation here with the chromophilia exhibit. We're so lucky to have the chromointerference in our country, in Mambo, which was like an institution that promoted and collected Carlos Cruz Diaz art since the very early years. And one of the things that I want to kind of like come back to finalize is this show at the Tate Modern that features Carlos Cruz Diaz as one of the pioneer digital artists. So I think that I might be on to something because other people are starting to acknowledge his contribution to the electronic arts, even though, so every time you look up this exhibit, one of the, most of the images that you will see is Carlos Cruz Diaz art, which is not normally considered a computer artist. So, yeah, to end my presentation, just to say, every analysis or every thought that we make when we look at our catalog, there's like a lot of like lost histories, and it is important for us as individuals to start, as an artist as well, to start making these connections and hopefully find new traces to the history of digital art. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this super well-prepared presentation, lots of interesting content. I just want to take the time to highlight a couple of things. So first, maybe, if Jose Ramon can add something about Iturralde's work, because we have one person who work directly with one of the persons discussed here. And I don't know if Felipe Cesar or Adriana are here to tell us a little bit about the commission of this Cruz Diez artwork that is now part of the Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano in Bogota. While this happens, also we can take some questions. I think we're fine with time. So please, the other thing, okay, so the mic there. The last thing I want to say is that these explorations between light and architecture maybe are a good stimuli for us to prepare ourselves for the installation that Chris Salter has this evening that has a lot to do with light and architecture and programming, and who is going to be also our keynote tomorrow.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Esteban, for telling all these things and just naming. It was 1979. I was a student, the first course in the grade of Fine Arts in the faculty in Valencia, Faculty of Fine Arts in Valencia. And I met this young guy who was José María Iturralde, just came from the States, working with Otto Pine and etc. And he was fascinated, of course, of all this cross between art, technology. So he was there just 1 or 2 years before when IBM gifted a computer to Spain, to the University of Madrid. As you said, as you mentioned, they built a building just to set up this computer. And the first idea of the technicians and the engineers was to claim to make a meeting of all artists, designers, architects, writers, that more or less were interested in the cross between art, technology, and science. So Iturralde was invited to that. And the experience of all of them, told by Iturralde to me, was that they didn't understand anything. It was completely difficult to talk to these technicians. And the technicians was just shoot white, you know, these dresses, black, large dresses, and say, what do you want to do? Just tell me what you want to do, and I will program for you. And the results were these plotters, linear plotters, you know, black and white, on a paper, on a plain paper. All those papers just were stored, you know, by this artist, and passed years and years and years, you know. And the only guys who made some results of this experience was like José María Iturralde, who went to the studios, saw the results in the paper, in the plain papers, and make serigraphies, okay? So in that case, this art was considered art because the art provided by the computers, or the plotters, were of course not considered art anyway. No? So that was the environment, that was the ambience. No? In 1969 was the first computer seminar, and that was who they touched to me, and they asked me, do you want me to help to make some structures, to fly structures? And I said, of course, for me it was a dream, you know, just to work with such a guy coming from the States. I was just 19 years old, and I was involved with many books that José María brought from the States that was written by Otto Pine, etc. No? So for us, that was a kind of paradise. Okay, so the ambience was that Iturralde tried to teach in the Faculty of Fine Arts in that time what he was doing, and the faculty say, no, thanks a lot, but this is not art. So that's the experience I can tell to you. You know? But we were really funny and very happy to go to the beach in Valencia and fly all this sculpture that we were doing with them, no, in the studio. So, okay, that's all.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Those flying sculptures are just unbelievable. Please, so Felipe César and Adriana are not here. Ah, okay, so maybe, please, Felipe, cuéntanos un poquito sobre cómo fue el proceso de la comisión del Cruz 10.
Perfecto, gracias Andrés, gracias Esteban por la presentación y por citar precisamente el anillo de inducción cromática que leímos tu texto después una vez publicado. No, esta es Carlos Cruz Díez donó a la Universidad de Bogotá Jorge Tadeo Lozano esta obra en el 2002, gracias a las gestiones de un exrector, Evaristo Obregón, quien conocía las galerías, la esposa de Carlos Cruz Díez, en Venezuela, y bueno, hizo la gestión, pero apenas se instauró en el año 2022. Fueron muchos años, 20 años de gestión para que la obra que se trajo desde París se instalara en la plazoleta de la Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano. Son 400.000 pequeñas piezas que fueron traídas desde el taller de Carlos Cruz Díez y hubo que traer a un arquitecto desde Francia, ¿no?, para hacer la instalación de la obra, que requiere una elaboración muy sofisticada, pues, para cumplir con los requisitos que exigía el maestro Cruz Díez. Desafortunadamente, cuando se instala y se inaugura la obra en el 2022, pues el maestro ya ha fallecido, pero su hijo pues hace las honras y posteriormente pues ya se abre al uso. Lo interesante de la obra, y lo escuchaba yo desde allá arriba, y que ya pues lo anotó el importante aporte que realiza pues Cruz Díez, es que revitaliza un espacio que tradicionalmente ha sido complejo, difícil, ¿no?, que tiene una historia pesada en Bogotá. Pues le da un valor con una obra que es viva, que es dinámica, que gracias a la luz que proyecta en los diferentes momentos del día, pues genera una sensación distinta, diferente para las personas que transitan allí. Entonces, nada, muchísimas gracias Esteban por permitirnos contar sobre esta maravillosa obra en Bogotá.
Muchas gracias. Just to clarify, so 400,000 pieces were imported from France to Bogota to make this, from his original studio to make this piece possible. It was thanks to the intervention of Felipe and Adriana. And the other thing, talking about regeneration, is that it played a very important role in the space there, because it helped to transform the area and be more lively and alive. You know, it used to be more dangerous. So that's another impact of this fantastic piece. Yeah, we had some hands. Yeah.
Thank you, Esteban, for such a great presentation. I was very curious if you could talk more about the relationship between Giorgini's hydrofluids investigation as an engineer and how those shapes came from that research in water, I guess it's water fluids or fluid mechanics. Because yesterday we were talking about research creation with the students, and I was wondering if you had thought about what are the conversations between those things, and anything that you can tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Gabriela. That's a very good question. There is a direct relationship between this computational research, like hard research for the papers and the dissertations in civil engineering, because a lot of the publications for the civil engineering were directly taken out, you know, from there to become actually painted and computer art pieces in some cases. And it's interesting because if he didn't have the mathematical foundations, he would never have been able to arrive to those shapes. And a lot of these projects are also collaborations with his PhD students. I was recently contacted by somebody in Shanghai who is investigating, give me just 1 second, Wei Chen, who was the a student collaborator of Giorgini, and they're trying to map out a relationship between the Chinese computer influenced art, So we're like we're talking about how Wei Chun-Chen in China, like also did something that is completely unknown to me. So it is kind of like fascinating to see how each of these connections that we made through students and teachers start spreading these ideas around the world. Yeah, thank you. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
We have time for one more question or comment.
I just wanted to finalize a comment. I find very interesting that it was the scientific knowledge that made him into an artist, that gave him an entry into art field.
Yeah, right. I mean, he had the sensibility from the early years that made him see that he was actually seeing something artistically beautiful. So I think it's in a way sometimes I feel like it's hard to tell. It's like what Ricardo was saying yesterday, like the chicken or the egg, you know? Yeah. Thank you.
And we are waiting for the next paper on punk rock and computer arts relationship, isn't it? So this is a way to say thank you very much. Please a round of applause to say thank you to our speaker. Enjoy lunch. Remember that 3 p.m. we have the second part of the Media Histories. It's in the Parque Tecnológico. Buses will be outside. Join us. Sometimes we need more people there, so please come and listen to good stuff, okay? Thank you.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Y también les recordamos que nos encontramos acá a la 1:45 para el cierre de la jornada de hoy. Gracias.
Ahorita es un conversatorio, ¿cierto?
Sí.
Dime.
Ay, oye, muchas gracias. No, usted, muchas gracias. Acá también tiene switch. Venga, sí, sí. Acá.
Juan, puedes apagar el videoproyector para que